All right, let's talk about cellular respiration and what that means for the paramedic. Now, what is cellular respiration? Think about back to your pulmonary lecture, and we talked about external versus internal respiration. External respiration refers to the external environment and getting oxygen into our body and getting rid of the byproduct of normal metabolism, which is carbon dioxide. When we talk about internal respiration, it's kind of referring to cellular respiration as well. Internal respiration is getting oxygen into our cells and taking the CO2 and water back, all right? Those are the normal byproducts of aerobic metabolism. The cellular respiration in and of itself can have an aerobic with oxygen or anaerobic without oxygen component, all right? We're going to talk about three different things here. We're going to talk about glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport system. All right? Let's break down that first word, glycolysis. And I've got a handwritten breakdown of this here in about 4 slides that we'll go over as well. So glycolysis is basically the breakdown of glucose, right? We've talked about this before. Your body wants to use glucose in order to make energy in the most efficient manner, because that's what cellular respiration is at its core. Your body's ability to make energy for all of the different body processes that need to happen. Think about the muscle contraction, right? ATP is required for that. And when your body produces energy, it produces ATP. So glycolysis refers to the breakdown of glucose within your cell. That glucose molecule, it's very large. It can't fit into the mitochondria. It's got to be broken down into something easier, something smaller, and something more workable. And what happens, it gets broken down into something called pyruvic acid or pyruvate. So glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose into pyruvic acid. Just this process alone doesn't require oxygen right now, so we could be hypoxic or not hypoxic, or in aerobic versus anaerobic metabolism, and we're going to create 4-ATP. Now, unfortunately, this process takes place, and this process takes energy in order to take place, and so you have to use 2-ATP in order to break down that glucose. So it produces 4-ATP, but it takes 2-ATP to break it down, and you get a net gain of 2-ATP. All right, this is glycolysis. Now let's talk about the Krebs cycle, tricyclic, or the TCA cycle, or the citric acid cycle, as it's sometimes referred to. What happens is that pyruvic acid, it needs to get broken down and change into something else called coenzyme A. There's another material, another compound that is produced, and that's called NADH. That's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. Just call it NADH, all right? You'll see why that's important here in just a second when we get into the electron transport system. When this happens, this is called the Krebs cycle, citric acid cycle. Carbon dioxide is actually released, all right? Now, in order for it to move on to the electron transport system, oxygen is going to be required for aerobic metabolism. All right. Now, once that NADH is created and the oxygen is introduced, you get something called the electron transport system. And NADH gives its electrons to the oxygen, and water is a byproduct. So when we say CO2 and water are a byproduct of normal metabolism, normal aerobic metabolism, that's why. Now, what happens is you get 34 molecules of ATP that are produced. So you get a total production in aerobic metabolism of 38 molecules, but remember, you got 2 molecules that went out the window during glycolysis, and so you get a net gain of 36 molecules of ATP. Super important here, right? This is the largest return on investment that you're going to get through cellular respiration. What's mandatory for this to happen? Glucose and oxygen, right? Oxygen being the big one, because the glucose can be broken down without the oxygen. All right, so here's that handwritten kind of algorithm flowchart, if you will. Start over here on the left under glycolysis. Glucose enters the cell and it breaks down and pyruvic acid is created. All right, you'll see right here 4 ATP are created, but it took 2 ATP, so you get a net gain of 2 ATP. Now, within the mitochondria, this is my very artistic representation of a factory, if you will, or a power plant within the cell. The pyruvic acid is moved into or changes into coenzyme A, and also NADH is created. All right, CO2 is released during this time, and then what happens is the NADH, which is a result of the coenzyme A and oxygen, combine, if you will, but really what happens is the electrons are given to the oxygen, and through that electron transport chain, 32 ATP are created. Now, what do we have over here? 38 ATP are produced. You lost 2 from glycolysis, and you have the net gain of 36 ATP. So byproduct of CO2 here, and water is released. All right? Pretty cool how that happens. Now, what happens when oxygen isn't there? Anaerobic metabolism. I'm going to give you a little brief introduction to this because we're going to cover this more in pathophysiology. All right? But here is just a little snippet. Okay, so without oxygen available, the NADH actually gives its electrons to the pyruvic acid, the pyruvate, creating lactic acid. All right, this occurs in the muscles in your body, and then lactic acid is actually transported back to the liver and converted within the liver back to pyruvic acid, where it enters the whole chain again. This process is called lactic acid fermentation. This isn't the only thing that happens, but once again, just a little bit of an intro before we get into pathophysiology. Now, why do we care? Well, let's say our patient's hypoxic for whatever reason. Could be pneumonia, so we've got an external respiration issue. Could be maybe they had a partial airway obstruction. Maybe they've got asthma and they've got a ventilation issue. What doesn't happen? Aerobic metabolism, right? Think about your bad asthmatic patient getting to the point where they can't decompensate anymore. They're so hypoxic. Well, we know that the metabolism is jacked, right? Your body's working real hard to maintain homeostasis, but it can't, all right? Why can't it? Because it can't produce energy through its normal, most efficient means. And so if not enough energy is being produced, that's kind of a snowball effect. And you'll see and why that has relevance on stabilizing our patients and maintaining a state of homeostasis. Okay, so just an introduction. Once again, like with all other recorded lectures, you're going to have to submit 2 questions regarding this to the assignment, and we'll discuss those in class. All right.